Hi, everyone. My name is Caitlin Dosler, and I'm excited to welcome you to the fourth episode of Virtual Fence Foundations. Today, we're going to get to hear from Matthew Jenkins, who we also got to hear from last month, so we're excited to get to listen to him again. Matthew is the 4R specialist with the Missouri Fertilizer Control Board, and today he's going to talk to us about utilizing virtual fence to really dive deeper into nutrient management on your properties. So we're going to listen to Matthew talk about that. And then we have a special guest, Jamie Kurtz, who is the Missouri State Grazing Specialist with NRCS. And he has joined us today to talk about the virtual fence initiative that NRCS is offering Missouri producers this upcoming year. So without further ado, typical rules like always, please save your questions for the end and we'll get to those. And otherwise, yeah, if you have any burning questions along the way, let us know and we'll try and get those answered. But I think with that, take it away, Matthew.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. Today is about nutrient management. So I kind of want to tie virtual fence into our nutrient management planning. First, I want to talk about, some basics of nutrient management, and then I want to follow that with soil sampling and specifically grid sampling, because we're going to later tie that into how we can use virtual fence to help our nutrient management plans. And then we're going to talk about manure distribution and how we can use that to reduce our soil nutrient variability across a field. We're going to talk about legumes as potential fertilizer sources, and then tying all that together, some potential uses for virtual fence with nutrient management. After that, we're going to go to Jamie and talk a little bit about cost share options, and then we're going to save those questions till the end like we usually do. Here, I want to present our four R's, or our four rights of nutrient stewardship. And those include the right source of fertilizer and when we apply that at the right time, at the right rate, and then at the right place, because we want to put that fertilizer at the exact place that it needs to be. And all of these will help us to achieve our cropping system goals of increased production, increased profitability, environmental protection, and ultimately farm sustainability. So, going through the four R's, right? Our first one is right source. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about some potential sources for pastures. And I have these broken into two categories: mineral fertilizers and non mineral fertilizers. So, some of the common mineral fertilizers that we might use in our pastures, for nitrogen, for example, we might use urea or ammonium nitrate. Or if we apply MAP and DAP for phosphorus, that carries a little bit of nitrogen with it, as you can see on this table. Below those, we have some examples of non-mineral fertilizers. So before going into those, I want to talk a little bit about enhanced efficiency fertilizers versus some untreated options, right? So we could use, for example, nitrification inhibitors on our mineral nitrogen fertilizers. So what those do is they slow the conversion of ammonium, which is sits in the soil and can stay there for longer periods of time. It slows the conversion from that into nitrate. Nitrate's prone to losses, right? It can be leached into below the soil, below the roots, maybe into groundwater, or it can go up into the air and maybe lower oxygen situations such as flooding and go into gaseous nitrogen. Enhanced efficiency fertilizers like nitrification inhibitors slow that so that we ultimately keep those plant available nitrogens in the soil. But with non-mineral fertilizers like legume nitrogen, or if we feed hay on top of the soil, those are also relatively slow release nitrogen fertilizers. Some common legumes might include red clover, white clover, alfalfa, there's many more, but they can fix, between 50 and 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And certainly not all of that's immediately available. As a matter of fact, about 25 to 50%, depending on a lot of factors, is going to be available in that first year. Afterwards, something like cool season hays have a relatively low amount of NP and K in them. But if you go, say, put a 1,200-pound bale out on a farm, it's going to have 10 to 15 pounds of phosphate per acre that can include some fertilization to that soil. So when we think about those non-mineral or organic forms of fertilizer, they have one more step to be broken down, or several more steps between, the plant material that they are, such as hay. It needs to be broken down into usable forms of nitrogen. So, right, they have protein and amino acids in them, and those need to be broken down into those usable forms by microbes. So, when we think about soil nutrient variability, we need to understand where our nutrients already are in the soil. So this study out of Georgia, it was an extension article that they published, but they show you the difference between 1 acre grids all the way up to 10 acre grids. So you can see how many samples they took on that 1 acre grid and then compared to the 10 acre grid and all those in between. And they wanted to see which one had the most accuracy in terms of identifying those soil nutrients, and which one was the most cost effective, which ultimately is a lot of what we think about on our farm. So, showing just one of the many pictures that they created, these soil maps. So, this was for pH. You can see the difference in 1 acre, how it shows you all the different, pHs across that landscape. And then in the 10 acre, you see how it's quite different between those two and everything in between. So, what they found in that study was that actually going between 2.5 acre grids and 1 acre grids increased the accuracy by quite a bit. So, they knew where those nutrients were at in that field. Going to costs, these red bars, that includes application cost, soil testing, fertilizer, and ultimately what you see here is that as you decrease the size of those grids, we actually get more accurate, and we really don't increase the cost because although the soil testing cost would be high at 1 acre grids, we use so much less fertilizer that actually it's very similar cost wise. So I wanted to go through some cost share options that we have out there for you guys. So with the Center for Regenerative Agriculture, we have this program where we'll provide a $20 per acre cost share to help you implement split nitrogen application. So, for example, if you attribute that $20 an acre cost into your grid sampling, you can see how that makes a lot of economic impact on your sampling, and you can put that fertilizer where it needs to be. We have another program that's just getting started. We call it a pilot project, but it provides $15 per acre, whereas this one was only on corn ground. This soil and water district pilot project is $15 per acre on any crop or forage. And it's in these 6 counties currently, but we are looking to expand it. Okay, switching gears a little bit, thinking about how our manure can affect our nutrient variability. So in that study, it was on a crop field, but think about where nutrients accumulate in pastures and how we can improve that with virtual fence. So in a continuous grazing system, a lot of our manure and therefore nutrients accumulate around, where cattle like to hang out. So around water, maybe there's trees out here. And as we can go to a more regenerative system with virtual fencing, we can improve the distribution by spreading those manure patties out across the entire pasture and not concentrating them in certain areas. So if you've been to a Missouri grazing school, you've probably seen this picture before, but it shows you how going from a 3 pasture rotation to a 24 paddock rotation can increase your piles of manure per 500 square feet. So you can see that this one's much darker in color, meaning that the overall distribution was better than this 3 pasture rotation. So I just shrunk those down a little bit and multiplied them out to maybe provide a better idea of what a whole landscape would look like. And what you see is that on this one, it concentrates pretty good around the water source, but then it's lighter colored on the outer edges, so there's not very many piles in these white areas. And whereas this one, there's quite a better manure distribution and therefore soil nutrient distribution in that system. So obviously, this can be much more achievable with virtual fencing. So going into the math a little bit, this was shown by Christine Mushrush last month. And if you look at it, there's not very many places where there's not a manure patty in every square yard. Going through the math a little bit, continuous grazing, it takes about 27 years to get one manure patty per square yard. But in a 2-day rotation, it only takes about 2 years, they estimated. So now think about it with virtual fence. Say you're doing 1-day rotations, or maybe you're rotating multiple times a day. Imagine how those numbers will change with virtual fence. You'll certainly, if you do it that often, be able to get a manure patty in 1 square yard every year. So think about what that can do to your nutrient distribution. Okay, switching gears a little bit to talk about interseeding legumes. So this was a study, I think, in Tennessee. They compared a tall fescue pasture with 60 pounds of nitrogen to a tall fescue pasture with red clover. So they interseeded that red clover, and it was between 36 and 57% of the forage. They created the exact same amount of forage on that landscape. But if you look here, the average daily gains in the cattle were a lot better. So, rotational grazing with virtual fence can help you distribute that nitrogen that's in that clover across the landscape and ultimately get more production out of your grasses as well. Showing that, in a spring and early summer system, you can increase your forage quality. Well, in this system, this was brome with legumes in the black bars, and this was fertilized brome with 80 pounds of nitrogen fertilizer in these gray bars. This was seeded in 2010. And on the next slide, keep in mind, 12 years later, I came into Nebraska and studied on this exact same pasture. So at 2010, a couple years later, it was about 20% of the forage was legumes. And in early spring, in these 2 cycles, so the cattle went through the 6 paddock rotation once and then twice, 3 times and 4 times. In the first 2 cycles, there wasn't much difference in livestock performance. So they gained very similar amounts in the springtime, whether it was fertilized or it had legumes. But as we get into the summer, we actually see that the quality of those cool season grasses go down, but those legumes stay pretty good quality, which produces us good average daily gain. So like I said, it was seeded in 2010 with those legumes, a maximum of around 20% legume in the forage. 12 and 13 years later, I just want to emphasize to you how much intensive grazing management can maintain legume stands over time and what that residual effect of those legumes is. So this blue bar is the nitrogen fertilized without legumes, and the green bars are with legumes, no nitrogen fertilizer. So what we see is even 12 and 13 years later, we have very little drop in forage production in those mixed grass legume systems. So not only does it provide a quality effect to our livestock, but it provides a nitrogen effect and a long-lived one if we specifically take care of that legume stand through rotational grazing. Switching gears into phosphorus and potassium. So I don't want you to really stick to these numbers hard and fast, but it shows a little bit of variation that you can achieve. But it's about how much phosphorus and potassium cattle can remove from the soil by grazing. So this is on a per pound of gain basis. So say Your grazing calves that get 2 pounds a day average daily gain. So those are going to be removing what 35 grams of phosphate per acre on that wheat pasture, and so on and so forth. So converting this into that first legume compared to fertilized system that we had, say phosphorus removal, according to their gain per acre that they got across the 2 to 2.5 month grazing period, they specifically in that system would have removed somewhere in the range of 6.4 pounds of phosphate per acre in that system. Now look at the fescue only system, it's much less, namely because of the lower gain per acre that they achieved. So in potassium, though, there's not really a lot of uptake of potassium that doesn't make it back through the other end of livestock. Now we're looking at those exact same grazing numbers compared to if we hayed them and what we would have saved by grazing instead of haying, or if we hayed it and then unrolled that hay back on that farm. So same numbers of phosphate. These are both phosphate this time. The haying situation would have removed around that 25 to 30 pounds of phosphate, whereas grazing would only remove, 2.5 to 6.5 pounds of phosphate. Ultimately, with this year's cost of fertilizer, saving us around $17 to $19 per acre. So, and remember, that's well distributed as long as we use rotational grazing management. Potash, this is a really kind of an interesting thing that happens. So we don't remove a lot of potassium by grazing, but by haying, we remove somewhere around in this system over 100 pounds of potassium per acre. So ultimately, if we would have grazed or if we would have unrolled that hay back on the farm, we would have saved around $70 per acre in phosphate. So now go back to the previous slide, 70 plus $15 per acre, somewhere around that $85 an acre that we would have saved by grazing that farm or unrolling the hay back on it. This shows, so say we're buying hay or bringing it from a different farm. How can we use that, combining our virtual fence map with our soil map to show us to put those nutrients exactly where they need to go? So say this yellow represents, say low P and K or whatever, but you can, if you're wanting to unroll hay across that, you can go draw your virtual fence boundary exactly where you need those nutrients. So you can obviously expand that to the whole thing. Say you're really low in an area. Make this a winter feedlot or sacrifice area for a short time to put those nutrients on that farm without having to go buy mineral fertilizers and maybe save you a little money that way. So I want you to keep in mind though, hay has a lot of nutrients in it, right? Not all of it is immediately available. A lot of it is in P and K. Nitrogen tends to be, like I said, that 25 to 50% availability in manure and things like that, organic forms. But so just keep in mind that, say cool season hay has 12 pounds of phosphate, about 80% of it is available in that first year and about 90% of the phosphate. So just keep that in mind whenever you're trying to add fertilization to your fields. I do want to say that if you do have a lot of hay buildup or manure buildup in these areas, it is generally recommended a light tillage application in that area to incorporate that. Otherwise, high accumulation of nutrients tend to run off. And the very last point I really want to talk about is carbon nowadays, especially, is really thought of a soil nutrient. So how can rotational grazing and how can virtual fence affect our soil carbon stocks? This publication, basically this guy went through and read a lot of the research on soil carbon stocks as affected by grazing and found that there was a lot of variation between studies. But ultimately, he thought that appropriate grazing management can increase carbon stocks. So if you've heard of the Carbon Cowboys, or Peter Bick and his crew that created the series Roots So Deep You Can See the Devil Down There, he got a team together of researchers down in Southeast United States. And on 5 farms, in 3 of those 5 farms, they found that they increased soil carbon stocks by management intensive or AMP grazing, adaptive multi-paddock grazing. So, like we can achieve with virtual fence, they used hard fences down there. They improved across all 5 of them, averaged. They increased soil organic matter by about 0.8%. But keep in mind, too, that soil organic matter above 4 is pretty good. So keep in mind that just having perennials on the landscape, maybe you use them as a cover crop for a couple years. They call that lay pasture. That's an opportunity to increase your soil carbon. So after they did that research, they wanted to go north and investigate what happened up north because things tend to be very different up there, like in Canada. So they're putting together a different research team for that. So if you want to learn about carbon credits, the Center for Regenerative Agriculture put together a really cool webinar series about this. And if you want to learn more about that, the girls put this QR code over here. Scan that if you want to go watch that, or you can go to YouTube and look up Carbon Lunch and Learn Center for Regenerative Agriculture, and it'll probably pop up. So next we're going to have Jamie on.
As Caitlin said, I'm Jamie Kurtz. I'm the State Grazing Specialist for NRCS here for the state, and so this year Missouri NRCS has adopted virtual fencing for the first time, and very grateful to Caitlin for her assistance in a lot of this. We are adopting this for the first time. There's some states last year that had virtual fence offered, so we're kind of working off of their setup for ours as well. But it's going to be broken into 2 different scenarios. The first one is going to be our fence scenario. It covers the one-time purchase and installation of the collars. It also covers the first year of the subscription cost for the landowner. And then for the next 5 years, so years 2 through 6 of the contract, we will pay a grazing management incentive. And that incentive will help cover, training, ongoing operation, annual fees, and other activities. If any of you have ever done any fencing with NRCS or with soil and water districts, fence has a 20-year lifespan associated with it. So we do have a national variance that you, as a landowner, would need to maintain this technology for 7 years. So we're going to assist you in the first 6 years of it, and you're going to be responsible for 1 year of maintenance on your own. And this variance will be attached to our information sheet that you will get at the time of contracting. With the new EQIP sign up, which is currently going on, so for FY26, we are actually going to have a virtual fence initiative. So with this initiative, we are going to pay people to adopt this new technology. The initiative itself is only going to be paying for the fence and the grazing management. So there won't be any financial assistance available for water development or seedings or anything else that is going on. We will need to document your existing level of management that's going on your property. You need to make sure and show that there's an increased level of management that's happening to be eligible for the 528 payment. And you, as a producer, will be required to keep records and turn them in yearly so that we can certify that the prescribed grazing or grazing management is being met by you as the producer. Containment fence is going to be required around the perimeter of the grazed area. So this doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be a perimeter fence around the property line. It just needs to be around the areas that are going to be grazed. These containment fences can be, 5-strand barbed wire. It can be whatever you think it's going to take to keep your animals in. And you can refer to our fence spec for containment fence requirements that we, as an agency, approve. So integrating into cropland is going to be part of the ranking process. Initially, we had talked about doing stock densities. So those that were interested in stock densities, increasing stock densities, that was going to be part of the ranking process. We punted on that and decided that we're going to go with people that are integrating this technology into their cropland, whether they're grazing residues or cover crops. Either way, the infrastructure again on the cropland will not be included in this initiative, but we can assist with that in other fund pools through EQIP.
Well, thank you, Jamie. That was good information. So we can keep that on our minds. But with that, thank you everybody for joining. And if you have any questions, pop on.
I have a question for Jamie while everyone's thinking of what they're going to ask. So, what if you don't have a current grazing system with NRCS, but you do have a current grazing system, maybe through like the Circle Regenerative Grazing or something like that, or it's just something that you do personally?
Yeah, you don't have to have installed that in the system with us. It could be an existing system on the farm that you've done yourself, or through other cost share through you all or whoever. Um, it'll be evaluated at the time of application, and just like we would with any other um, cost share application, and then we would, as long as it meets our minimum requirements for prescribed grazing, well, you're eligible.
Awesome. That's really good information. And then we have another question that says, would record keeping for virtual fence systems include sharing location information of the callers/animals?
Absolutely not. So we are more interested in the, minimum maximum grazing heights, the number of days between rotations, number of animals. You don't have to share the information that you have with this specific company. We don't need that location information. We're just making sure that your management level is being increased from what it was to start with.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have another one that says, does the EQIP program only apply to Missouri, or does it apply to Oklahoma as well?
Nope. So this initiative is it's only for Missouri. So a little bit of background. Each state, virtual fence is an approved practice within NRCS as a whole. Each state gets to choose whether they want to adopt it or not. It was actually available last year, and we chose not to adopt it, mainly because there were too many questions out there, and I felt that it was going to be some trouble. Yeah, so we're going to. You need to talk to Oklahoma to find out whether they're offering it or not. I know the initiative is just for Missouri. That's a statewide initiative that we have.
Yep. So just like we've said in previous webinars, what we're for this particular cost share, it is only for Missouri. But if you can go and talk to your people, your NRCS people in Oklahoma, tell them that you're interested. The more that they hear from you that there is interest in it, the better it is, and more likely it is that they would, implement something like that. So just make sure you're getting out there and talking with people that you're excited about something like this. And then we have another one that says, would you provide record-keeping forms to ensure all needed information is being provided by your producer?
Yeah, so we're in the process, and I actually hope next week. It's been a tumultuous week for us this last week, but I'm hoping to get what we call our IR, which is kind of our information sheet. I'm hoping to get that completed and ready for comment. So that sheet will include all of the required information that will need to be turned in for records. And then on our prescribed grazing or grazing management specification we have now, there's actually a copy of an example record sheet. But yeah, we'll help you get that information in there.
And then another question is, how much will this cost share be?
So
this was coming.
That's the $50 million question. And I don't know yet. I mean, I have access to the information we had last year, which I've kind of ran the numbers, and I think I've shared those with Caitlin as well. This is going to be pretty all encompassing. Fortunately, now I don't really want to share dollars and cents until we have those numbers. Generally, by now we have those numbers in our hand, but I actually just got an email this morning that we will have those numbers on October 7th, barring a government shutdown. So yeah, as soon as we get those numbers and have them on board and have them in hand, I'll be glad to share them with Caitlin and get that stuff out. It'll be on our public facing websites for everybody to see. But I'm confident that it's going to be a good number. It's going to be a good number for us. So
You calculated, Jamie, because I would completely agree if that's the
yeah,
case.
So with as much information as we could say, they're good. It's good numbers. Hopefully we'll
yep,
learn more
yep,
October 7th,
yep,
barring
yep.
government shutdown. So
Yes, yeah. Watch out for the shutdown.
yeah, all of those things. Do you have to have grazing height / paddock duration data from the grazing system prior to applying for this virtual fence initiative?
You do not, but it is helpful. So we would like to, there's going to have to be a conversation between our planners and the producer. Our goal with this whole initiative, the initiative itself, was for some of our producers we've worked with that are kind of those early adopters anyways, to hopefully get them excited and get them involved in this program. And as most of us know, to those are the producers that probably are going to have that information on hand. They may not have it down to the nth degree, but they can at least say, "Hey, I'm moving animals, X number of times a week. I am grazing animals this many days out of the year." That's the basic information we need, so that if you've got a producer that's moving cows weekly and they're going to slap these collars on and still move them weekly, this is not for them. But even if they are the ones that are moving weekly and we can slap collars on them and move them twice a week, I feel like that's a win. So you don't have to agree to move cows 6 times a day or anything crazy like that to be considered for this initiative. We're just trying to take people to that next step that they're comfortable with.
Jamie, can you tell
Yep.
producers a little bit about, so say they don't get selected for the initiative right up front. Is there other options that they can apply for to potentially?
Sure. And to tie right into that with the money situation, we don't know how much money we're getting allocated. So we can't throw a dollar figure into this program until we know what our allocation is going to be for the year. So with that being said, this technology is available for all of our, let's call them ranking pools that would be eligible for fence. So it could come out of the cropland fund pool. It could come out of the pasture and hayland fund pool. We have what they call FOSA, or field office service area fund pools, that can come out of. So there's multiple fund pools that can come out of this. The way EQIP is going to be done this year, without getting into the weeds too far, is the initial allocation or the initial sign up is going to fund our initiatives, our special initiatives, and some of our older applications that are on file. So if you don't get a call, December 1st that you're funded, don't assume that you're out, because we're trying to stretch this funding out for workflow issues for us as an agency. So our period of funding is going to be longer. Now, if you don't get funded at all this year, you will have an opportunity to sign up again for the following fiscal year. Like I said, the sky's the limit. I have no idea what our funding level is going to be. Just because you don't get funded right off the bat, don't give up. And I think that's what Caitlin was trying to get me to say. So there's multiple opportunities. You as the applicant don't need to get in the weeds. That's our job, to get in the weeds. Hopefully, we're going to fund as many of these as we can get, and it sounds like we've had a pretty good initial sign up, so which excites me a little bit. So hopefully we'll be able to fund everybody.
Yeah, I hope so too. So we had someone put in the chat that Iowa has published theirs, and non-Iowa folks are welcome. So PFI, or Practical Farmers of Iowa, if I'm correct on what that acronym is, will have our grazing cost share application from December 1st through the 31st. It might be stackable with EQIP. It's not a huge dollar amount, but it's a quick turnaround. And then they provided that link. So if that's something that you're watching the recording and interested in, you can reach out to Matthew or anybody on this team, and we'll get that information to you. If you can put this on rented ground, so would this be acceptable on those acres? Because I know there's a lot of interest, because there's not always that ability to put in infrastructure on those acres.
So as long as one of the requirements with EQIP is that there's a form, and I'm not going to try to tell you what the number is because I'll probably butcher it. And if there's NRCS people on this call, they'll make fun of me. So there is a form, and what it is a form that basically it's an awareness form for the landowner. So fence, even though this is virtual fence, it's still classified as a structural practice. You've got to have permission from that landowner, whoever actually owns the property, to install these practices on their property, because if they were to kick you off next year, you're still required to maintain that practice for the length of the 7 years. Whenever we're figuring, we have to figure how many collars you're actually eligible for. We got to make sure that you're within that limit of do you have enough acres for the number of collars that you're requesting? So if you've got 10 acres and you're requesting 200 collars, probably that's not going to work. It's probably not even going to work for sheep and goats. But we've had some inquiries about people in rented ground that, hey, I've got 10 acres and I winter my cows at my house, but then they go out onto other people's property. We have to be able to show that in that rotation so that we're not, annihilating that 10 acres that you have those animals on. That's something that you need to work with your local field office on to get those forms. Like I said, we will run our what we call our Graze 4 program to make sure that you have the acres to support the collars. It depends on the landowner situation. If you've got a long-term lease on a piece of property, probably isn't going to be a problem for the landowner to sign it. We're not specifying that you have to have a permanent water source in place. If there's a pond that you're wagon wheeling off of, whatever, just as long as we've got water available on those acres is what we're worried about for infrastructure.
Awesome. And then is there a part of this application that might incentivize using this technology to try to bring that next generation back onto the farm? Is there a promotion for young farmers? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yep. So there is for beginning farmers. We do have an increased level of cost share. So prescribed grazing, or what we call grazing management now, the 528 practice is actually one of the Missouri's priority practices. Because of that, it's already funded at the 90% level. But the fence, so the actual collars themselves, we will cost share them at a 75% rate of the rate that we have. If they're beginning farmer or socially disadvantaged or any historically underserved producer is eligible for 90% on those collars. So they will get a little increased rate, but since grazing is one of our priority practices in the state, they're already getting an increased level, and that's for everybody. But yeah, so there is a little priority. We do have fund pools for beginning farmers that are separate from this. So yeah, they'll have a few more chances, I guess, for funding than somebody that's been farming their whole life.
Jamie, thinking about a question I get a lot from folks when I get asked about the cost share, a lot of them are wondering, like, when will they find out? Because just like my experience, some companies can get you your stuff in 2 weeks, and some companies it can take longer than that, depending on demand and stuff like that. And so I have a couple producers where they're like, I'd like to sign up, but I'd also would like to have my collars, within the next couple of months type of a
Right.
situation.
Yeah, so that's the $50 million question. Again, and I hate to keep rolling to this, but a lot of this is going to depend on our whether we're shut down or not. But I would say I would anticipate, you know, by the time everything gets rolled out, we would not be able to actually purchase collars until after the first of the year. I don't see a scenario where I could be wrong, but I think that they need to plan on probably the first of the year before they would be eligible to purchase them. And then if it does end up being November, awesome. And the way we've kind of totally changed up the way we're programming this year, so it's hard to say. We're hoping that it goes faster now that we've made some changes to how that programming is going to happen. But just keep in mind, don't order them until you actually have a contract. That's going to be a kicker. We don't want somebody to order collars and then come to us and ask for cost share on them. For anybody that's worked with us, patience is key. I promise you, our field staff is working as hard and as fast as they can. We've lost a lot of employees, so patience, please. So I don't even know. I don't want to get tied to a date. You back me in a corner there.
Sorry. That was
You're fine.
that
You're
was
fine.
not my intention.
I would like to think that it's within 60 days, hopefully. I hope that holds true.
I think patience is a waiting game in the virtual fence world.
Yes, yes.
That's something, yeah, the producers also have to understand is you guys can only go so fast, and then the companies themselves can only go so fast. And so I think
Right.
you hit the nail on the head with
Yeah.
patience is key.
And then will the tower be included in cost share if they choose to go with a company that has a tower?
So that is figured into the 382, the fence rate. So yes, the technology with the towers was figured into the cost scenario. And just like any other, it's kind of like any other thing. You can go. Our cost share is not going to spell out that every nut, bolt, and component. So obviously, with some of these, we need towers. Some of them we don't. But when the payment scenarios were developed, the towers were included in that price.
Awesome. And then another question that we got is if a farmer is approved to buy collars with EQIP, but the supplier cannot fill the order until partway through that grazing season, will the farmer be out of compliance?
Nope, nope. So on the contract, the first year, that's why we don't pay the incentive on the first year. That comes the later into your contract. So we understand there's going to be a lag. Now it's kind of funny. All the reps that I've talked to, they're like, "Oh, no problem. We'll have collars in a couple weeks." But after talking to Caitlin, I don't think it works quite that smooth. So no, you will not be required to. In fact, you will not be required to. Only thing we need to see year one is the receipt for the collars, and obviously, probably it wouldn't hurt to have some pictures with the collars on the cows, and that's going to be up to the field office. Each field office will kind of dictate how they want to do it. If I was in a field office, I'd want to be on every one of them taking pictures because I get out of the office. But yeah, so we don't need any kind of records at all, whether you get the collars in June or you get them in December. It doesn't make any difference. We don't expect you that first year to have those records.
I just kind of wanted to end this with a question that I think that all of us who are, trying to answer and field questions from producers about virtual fence get a lot. And that is, how do I justify the cost of virtual fencing?
Okay, I will start it. And yes, Jamie, Shelby, Matthew, Chrissy, feel free to jump in. So justifying the cost of virtual fence. And so I think there's so many different ways you could take this question, and it's very operational or operation dependent, and that's why one of the first things when I have these conversations with producers is how is it going to affect your operation? Because I think every producer needs to go into when they're trying to buy virtual fence with like a solid plan in place. Like I had a producer who he's like, I'm currently moving cows once every 3 days. And now I know with virtual fence, I can move my cows at least once a day, if not 2 to 3 times per day. And so you don't have to have the whole puzzle laid out, but you kind of need that perimeter idea, right? And so I think you have to look at it from the labor standpoint. In some cases, the cost of virtual fence, the amount of labor it can save some operations could technically be the equivalent of a farmhand in some situations. Like if you're having someone out there moving those cattle multiple times a day and it's taking them roughly all day or the majority of the day to do it, I mean, I'm not saying get rid of your farmhands. Don't take it that way at all. But I'm just saying virtual fence can act as another person on the operation in some ways. A producer sitting in a combine during harvest, and you can be wondering what your cows are doing and opening up your phone and checking their location. So, like the ease of mind of it. I had a producer go on vacation for the first time in a number of years, and he was sending me pictures of him checking his cows from the beach. Like, no lie. And so, just you're able to spend more time with your family. You're able to go to your kids' sporting events. If you start looking into the grazing side of things, I mean, if you can potentially increase the number of grazing days you're out on pasture, if you can, and that can potentially lead to having to buy less hay, feed less hay, and you could have cost savings there. If you're able to creep graze those calves out ahead of those cows and they're able to put on more weight so you can sell them for more in the sale barn at the end of the season, then you're essentially looking at another avenue that could bring more revenue into your operation. And so this one's really hard because I also always tell producers you don't have to have it to be a good producer, right? So if you're doing great with what you're already doing and it's working, great. You don't need virtual fence. But if you're in a situation where you would like to upgrade a grazing situation or you want to start rotationally grazing on cover crops or something like that, that's where virtual fence could be a really important tool in the tool belt. And I think, like you said, it could potentially be the way another kid gets to come home and work on the family farm or something like that. And so that's kind of my side of it.
With virtual fence being so novel, rotational grazing management is not novel. It's been here, it's being done, it's been done. And so as we're educating this, we talk about the pros and cons, and the biggest con of it is labor. There's more time involved on the ground, doing infrastructure and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a con to rotational grazing, but I feel like having something novel like virtual fence, it's emerging, it's innovative. Like you said, being able to take a vacation for the very first time, that's what it's all about. We're all human, we choose to work on the farms and invest our lives to that, but you deserve grace as well. So having this technology and being able to evolve it and support rotational grazing, because we are still notorious for continuous grazing and overgrazing our pastures. So being able to have a technology that supports us in rotational grazing, I think is just great.
Yeah, labor and grazing, labor is the overarching thing. Grazing management, improving your grazing management is certainly important. But when we were up north a couple days ago, the producer up there was saying that, like you said, it could replace the cost of a farmhand. I think he said, on 500 cows, it was like what, 30 grand? So if you think about that for a labor standpoint, 30 grand is, if you pay your farmhand, 50 grand a year, that's a lot of savings, and then you don't have to find that person. But there's labor, and then there's so many subcategories. So one thing that guy did was he said, man, my calves, like Caitlin was saying, my calves are so much heavier because they get the opportunity to go creep graze. So if you're not familiar with that concept, your cows are in one area, but then the calves are able to crawl out and go get the best stuff out there. It's like creep feeding, but grazing. And then you can go graze your cows on top of that. So that's a huge benefit that we got to see directly with grazing management and harvest efficiency, like we talked about with the last webinar. Do really tiny grids if you're going to do grid style grazing. But what he did, I thought was actually way more realistic, even with virtual fence, than doing a grid style grazing system. So what he did was he had already solid paddocks. He had 2.5 acre paddocks uh, across so many of his pastures. But what he did was he strip grazed within those little paddocks. And normally we say, no, don't do that. But for perennial grasses during the growing season, you're not going to get any more growth. So he was moving them like 3 times a day. You're not going to get any more growth within that day or two time frame as you would just by leaving them in there. So you can improve your harvest efficiency by giving them just little amounts at a time and further improving that harvest efficiency. So you have that standpoint. And you never even would have thought of, I mean, maybe you would have thought of being able to do that, but the labor of it was like, no, I could never do that. But if you put a number to that, what it would save you if you did do that with polywire fence, that is extreme. So you have the labor and then the one subcategory of management, and then all of these other things like nutrient management that comes from that. Like if you could strip graze them like that multiple times a day, imagine the nutrient distribution that you'd have, you know. So keep that in mind.
And then in the chat, we had someone add into this conversation. It was going to cost me about $60,000 to redo my farm fence back in 2018. I don't even want to think about what it would be now. I don't either. And I can buy a lot of collars for that $60,000. So there's a lot of ways that you can justify this. I think that we've proved that with all the discussion here. It just comes down to your farm and what you are wanting to do and your numbers. So, spend some time thinking about that as you look into getting this technology. And then we have one more question, and then we're going to log off. What about adding animals to your herd after the first year or two? Can you get additional collars?
So as long as we can show that they're needed, you can apply for more. So you would have to do something, whether it's increasing your land base or something of that nature, or if you didn't, maybe you didn't have enough animals, you weren't stocked fully at the front end, they would have to be done under a separate application though. So we can't add collars midstream to an existing application. That would all have to be done. You would be eligible to apply for it again the following year.
Since there are no more questions and we just took our last one, as you guys log off, please don't forget to take our survey. I've dropped the link in the chat where you can scan that QR code. But I want to thank Matthew and Jamie for joining us and giving us all of that really good conversation and information as we think about implementing virtual fence on our operations. So thank you guys, and we look forward to seeing you next month at our last one. This one's going to be on October 24th. At our same noon to 1 time. And this is going to be a really cool opportunity because it's going to allow you guys to hear from producers who are currently using virtual fence and the providers that are doing it. So we're going to have 3 different companies here with 3 different producers to all talk about their experiences. So if that sounds interesting, make sure that you put that on your calendar and make sure that you're here at noon next month. And with that, I'll thank you guys and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.